Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. Today I'm going to show you my workflow in Topaz, Denoise, and Sharpen AI right after this. So today I'm going to take you through my workflow in Topaz, Denoise AI, and touch on Sharpen AI because it's a similar workflow. Once you get the concept, there's really no need to be redundant and show you the whole process in both programs. Now these are the two that I use the most. Denoise almost on every image. So we'll start with Denoise, and I'm going to pop over to Photoshop because in my workflow, that's how I do it. So let me bring that up. Here we go. So I just pulled up an image that had some noise in it. This is a Canada warbler I shot back in spring. I shoot these in overcast conditions often, and in the tree canopy, you'll actually see. I really like this image, by the way, because it's got these hints of rhododendron in the background. So they like these dense habitats. So you could see he's just kind of foraging in the rhododendron. But because of that, there's also low light. So this was shot at 1600 ISO on a D500, which is not the greatest low light sensor. So with that said, there's some noise in here. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. And where are you? All right, so we'll zoom in here and just give you an idea what that noise looks like. Okay, so you can see it's pretty prevalent. I'm zoomed in here 200%. All right, and there's 100%. So how do I use denoise? Well, there's a couple ways to use it. One is to use it straight as a raw file edit. So if you open denoise, I've got it opened here, and you take a file and you drag it onto, or open it with the browser, you will open the raw file right into denoise. So let me do that now. So there's the file that I've been working with today. I'm going to drop it right in here, and you're going to see it's going to bring up a couple of preview windows. Now, one of the settings in here, so you've got standard, and I'll go through each box here. I click on the top left box, I put it on standard, go to the next one, clear, the next one, low light, and the next one, severe noise. Those are the four that I would use, but this is a raw file. So they give you another option here for raw file. And after you play around with these settings, you can change the amount of noise reduction and sharpness. Then you hit the update preview. And I'm not going to go through this because I've already done it. And it's going to open up that raw file into something that looks like this. So this was the raw file. You can see it's a little underexposed. I'll deal with that in a minute. But I basically just saved that file as a TIFF and open it back into Photoshop. Now, this is not the method I use, by the way. I'm just showing you one of the methods you can use, and I'll show you why I don't use this method. I made some adjustment to this to get it, kind of the exposure to where it needs to be. And you could see there's, a little bit of artifacting, which does happen with all noise reduction softwares. But I also did the same thing by opening the raw file into Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, making some edits, and then bringing it right into Photoshop. So this is the unedited image right here, or unprocessed. So you can see this still has noise in it. The one over here, I've done the noise reduction already. This one I haven't. So what I do is I bring it into Photoshop as a layer, and then immediately I duplicate that layer. So you could see here, I've already done a couple of those background copies. And then if you're into naming your layers, you can name this denoise. Now I'm going to run this through denoise. But before I do that, I'm going to make another duplicate background layer. All right, so now I've got another just a blank copy with noise in it. All right, so one layer has the noise. This layer, I'm now going to remove the noise. Topaz is a wonderful product in terms of its integration. It's really, really, really easy to use here. So you're going to see it pop right up. And then back to my options. So I'll go through these options again. I've got standard up here, clear, low light, and down here I'll put it on severe noise. And I make some adjustments to each one. I have each one set a little bit differently. And I'm not afraid to go with 100% noise reduction, and I'll show you why in a minute. Now, I can't tell you that one works better. I always update the preview and see what it does. And you can see the preview time to generate isn't significantly long. It's going to take about 10 seconds, 15 seconds to update. And there it is. As a general rule, AI clear is the fastest, applies a fair amount of noise reduction, and does the most sharpening to an image. So it sounds like that would be the greatest option, right? Always use AI clear. There is, however, when you use clear, it will introduce more of these little color artifacts. And I'm going to zoom into 400% on this and show you where you're going to see it in this image. Anywhere where there's greens or blues is where you're going to normally see it. And it happens more so with clear than any of the other modes. So here you'll see right around the eye ring, you see a little bit of a green cast there, and the other ones don't have it. It did also attempt to sharpen the image more. Now, all of these look pretty good to me. So I'm gonna go with this low light option here at 100% noise reduction and about 50% or so sharpening. And I'm gonna go ahead and apply that. So there we go. Now the processing time is gonna vary on your computer. I don't find it to be that long. I've heard other people say, you know, it's slow. If you've got a slow computer, this might take a minute or two. For me, it generally takes about 20 seconds. If you use AI Clear, that is about half the time. I've done another video on that. AI Clear is about 10 seconds. And it also matters the size of your image. I've got this cropped down to about 4,000 pixels. Okay, so now let's look at what happened here. And I'm going to compare this to the raw. All right, so I'm zoomed in really, really tight here. And there's the raw. Now notice the raw is smoother. I think it has a little bit more color artifacts. And this is the reason I don't process it through raw. I'm not telling you you can't do it. In theory, it should be better because raw files have more information, or you're using the base file. But when you're working in Photoshop, you're working with a lot of information. I like this version better. So I do, that's the one reason. I just think the quality is actually better. But here's the big thing. And here's the way I work in these layers. Sometimes the noise reduction is too strong or too powerful, and I may not have the fine control over that. I'm going to bring up an editing tool that I use. I teach this on my Patreon site. Feel free to check that out. I'm not going to give it away here. I give away a lot of free information on my YouTube channel. I do keep some stuff proprietary for my Patreons who are paying. But this is an auditing tool that I use. It actually is great for showing noise. Now, let me go back to the original image, and you'll see how much noise is in it. Pretty significant, right? And when I bring on the denoise layer, you could see it really removed a lot of that noise. Now, on a micro level, you will also see some patterns that show up in here. Now, to me, the patterns are much less offensive than the noise itself, but you'll start to see them in there. And if you get really, really smooth images, sometimes that'll happen. By the way, all noise reduction software has artifacts. No matter what anybody tells you, especially anything that's dealing with artificial intelligence like Topaz, where it actually delineates subject from background and only removes the noise necessary in the background and tries to keep the details in the subject. But here's what I use. Here's how I use this. I'm going to get rid of this layer right here. Okay, so I've got my denoise layer, and because I'm working in layers, I now have control over opacity. And typically what I do is I dial down that opacity to about 70 to 80%. Now watch when it's at 0, all of the noise is there. And I'm going to move this slider, and all I'm doing is bringing the Topaz layer on top of the original layer. So I'm adding the denoise in slowly. And when I get to about 70% or 80%, you start to see a little bit of the original noise there and a lot of the Topaz noise reduction. And this is the method that I use. This is why I do it in layers. This is why I use Photoshop. This is why I always duplicate the layer early and keep the original. By doing that, I have the ability now to have a very quick and easy fine control. I mean, look how fast I can make these adjustments. So all I have to do now is work with opacity, and I'm going to bring a little bit of the original detail back and a little bit of the noise. But I'm not a noise freak. I don't need to get rid of 100% of the noise. I leave a little bit of that grain in there. So here is, I'm going to show you the same thing with the sliders. Here's at 0% opacity. That's all of the original noise. And as I slowly increase the opacity, you'll see some of that noise starting to disappear. And then there's just a little bit of it originally left. If I went all the way to 100, I would have all of the Topaz noise reduction applied. If I slide it back, it's not that I'm not applying it. It's just I'm letting the underlying layer show through. And that's typically what I do. May not work for you, play around. Maybe it will work for you. And that's what I do. So that's my workflow in Denoise without getting into, I've done a separate video. I'll link it up here if you want more details on Denoise. I did an older version, but it's very similar to the current version. And it will give you some more information on Denoise. So check out the card above. So what did this file end up looking like? Just if you're curious, this was my finished edit. You can see just a little bit of touch-ups, but didn't really need much. And again, I really like these environmental shots. I take a lot of pride in habitat and showing habitat that the birds are in. And this is a very, very familiar habitat for Canada warblers. Now, let's jump over to Sharpen real quick. I'm not going to even bring up Sharpen because just for the sake of time, what I am going to do is show you a northern harrier that I shot. I actually just shot this, and as I was editing it, I thought this is a great example of Sharpen. I don't use Sharpen AI on all my subjects. On this one, I did. Now, when I took this, I was photographing songbirds. It's actually a song sparrow. And I was set at the end of the day. The light was really pretty. And I thought, man, I just got to capture something. I wanted harriers. I hadn't gotten one all day. I was shooting out my car window. And there were some song sparrows floating around. I thought, okay, I'll take advantage. Moved my camera settings down to 1/320th of a second, which is slow, but it's okay for portraits of non-moving birds. And I got some song sparrow shots at those shutter speeds. And as I'm shooting the song sparrow, wouldn't you know it, the harrier that I've been looking for all day and had seen at great distance pops up right in front of me. Now I cropped this down a little bit, but not much. And this harrier hen, this immature harrier hen, pops right out of the grass. And I don't see it. I don't know if it popped up or came over this little hill, but it was right there, coming right at the car. And all I could do was squeeze off 5 or 6 frames. Happened to get lucky here. I actually stitched the bottom of this. So I took 2 frames because in this frame, the harrier was way, way low in the frame. And then because I was surprised, I was able to get the harrier in a couple frames later, but the wings were clipped because it was that close. So I just basically stitched the bottom of one frame to the top of the other and came up with this really nice composite. Now, the problem is I was at 3/20th of a second. If you zoom in here tight, you'll see a couple things. One, there's a little bit of noise in there, but there's also it's not super, super detailed for as close as she was. It could have been a little bit of motion blur there. It could have been that the focus wasn't perfect, but I thought this is a great example for Sharpen AI. So what I did with Sharpen AI is I ran it through here. And so watch when I toggle back and forth. This is off, very slight adjustment, and this is on. But I am going to put that auditing tool that I showed earlier on here, and you'll see that Sharpen AI actually reduces noise in the process. So I didn't put this through Denoise, but notice the noise start to go away. I also want you to notice the opacity layer up here is set at 67%. And that was intentional. So this was it at 100 when I did Sharpen at 100. But I brought it down because I liked the way it felt better here. I also noticed when I was in the preview mode that 2 different Sharpen modes gave me 2 different looks. One took away more noise, and another one gave me more sharpness around the face. And so what I actually did is ran it through twice. And again, this is the advantage of working in Photoshop, the advantage of working in layers, and the advantage, I think, of my workflow. I ran it through a second time. And this time, it sharpened the face a little bit more. So I'm going to toggle off and on. So that was the first version, which removed some of the noise, sharpened it a little bit. And then this version sharpened it even more. You can see it there. And when I looked at it, I thought it looked best when I blended these modes. Let me set the opacity to 100%. I had it turned down a little bit. All right, there's the version 1, and there's version 2. Now I'll go back to the beginning. That's the original with a lot of noise. That's the first version, and that's the second version. The second version felt a little too strong. So again, working in these opacity layers, what I did is I dialed each layer down to about 67%. And what that did is it let some of the original noise come through from the original image, gave me the first edit, which was pretty good, and then allowed me to add that last edit on top, detailed. And when I put this auditing tool on top, you'll see what happens with the noise there and there. Gave me a really nice file without a lot of noise and sharpened up the subject's face at the same time. And that, I did a couple little edits on top of that. You could see just added a little dodging and burning. And that was my final image. It's an image I like. I think it will look good. I don't know that I'll print it. I don't know that I would say the quality is quite there for print. It's certainly going to look good on the web. And if it was printed small, it would be great. I don't think this is one I could print 20 by 30. I would have loved to have shot this. I shot this on a crop sensor. I would have loved to have shot this on a full frame sensor and had that closeness and been ready for it. I think I could have increased my shutter speed. If I had been tracking it, coming at me, I certainly would have had focus nailed, and a higher shutter speed would have helped with these sharpness issues. But sometimes these things happen. I was fortunate. I was in a good spot when it happened. I'm not going to toss the image. I think it's still a good image. I love the head pose. None of that was manipulated. He literally, or she, as she popped up, she was flying over that area and she just turned her head one way and then she kind of turned it back the other way real quickly. If you go like 3 or 4 frames later, her head's turned the opposite direction. So anyway, I hope you liked this video. I hope you understand the workflow. Hope it makes sense. You can see the advantages of working in layers in Photoshop for everything. But even with Denoise and Sharpen, there are advantages to doing that. If you want some more information about some of those editing things I showed you, I do so many of these videos on Patreon that take you behind the scenes with me in the field, and then also show you some of these editing techniques that I use that are much different than this. So if you're making that move where you're kind of familiar with Lightroom, really want to get into Photoshop, especially if you specialize in birds, I'm going to tell you it's a good service, so check it out. I'll put some information down below. Thanks for tuning in tonight. As always, I do appreciate your ongoing support for the channel. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and do that now. I really do appreciate it. Leave me a comment if you found it helpful. Is your workflow different? I'm also curious about the raw files. If anybody has any experience working in the raw files through Denoise or Sharpen, if you like that better. I personally, I don't find it the way that I like it. I really do like to work in these PSD layers. But yeah, again, appreciate your support, and we'll talk to you soon.